The old man had lived on that quiet street longer than anyone could recall, and over time he had become the kind of neighbor everyone trusted without even thinking about it. His days were simple, defined by gardening in the mornings, reading by the window in the afternoons, and cooking warm meals for himself as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. On this particular evening, as a soft drizzle whispered against the pavement, he was stirring a pot of rich, simmering soup, a recipe he had perfected over years of lonely dinners. Through the window, he noticed movement outside, two figures standing near his gate. A young woman and a teenage boy, clearly weary, their clothes damp and travel-worn, their expressions hovering somewhere between discomfort and fatigue. Something in their posture, hesitant, almost fearful, pulled at the old man's heart. Without a second thought, he stepped outside with the pot still warm in his hands, careful not to appear abrupt. His voice was gentle as he said, "You both look cold. I've made more soup than I can eat. Would you like some while you rest?" The boy's eyes lit up instantly, hope flickering through the shadows on his face, but before he could answer, the woman touched his arm lightly and whispered, "No, we can't. We're just waiting for someone." Her polite refusal felt rehearsed, as though she had said it many times before, and beneath her words lingered a worry too quiet to conceal. The old man nodded, but he could not ignore the unspoken story lingering between them. 2. Rain began to fall more steadily, each drop creating rippling circles in the puddles near their feet. The woman kept looking down the dark street as though expecting someone to appear at any moment, and each time she checked, a tension seemed to tighten in her shoulders. The boy looked hungry, truly hungry, in the way that makes a person stare longer than they should at anything warm and comforting. The old man noticed the boy's eyes following the steam twisting upward from the pot, and he offered again, softly this time, as though speaking to the fear wrapped around them rather than to the hunger. "No trouble at all. A bowl won't cost you anything but a moment to warm up." But the woman shook her head with a firmness that betrayed her uncertainty. She wasn't rejecting the kindness, she was rejecting the danger she feared might come with accepting it. The old man gently asked if they were lost or if they needed help, and again she answered, "We're fine, we're just waiting for someone." Her voice trembled on the last word, and the old man sensed that whoever they were waiting for had not come through on the promises they depended on. The boy shifted from foot to foot, hugging himself for warmth, and the old man's heart tightened with concern. It wasn't curiosity that drove his worry, it was the unmistakable recognition of people carrying more burdens than belongings. 3. The old man invited them to at least step under the shelter of his porch to escape the rain. This time, the woman hesitated for a long moment before allowing herself to nod. They followed him to the porch, where the warm glow from his windows spilled onto the wooden floorboards. The boy sat down immediately, exhausted, his breath visible in the cold air. The woman remained standing, arms wrapped around herself as though holding her fear in place. The old man placed the soup pot on a small side table and leaned on the railing, giving them space rather than crowding them. He asked a gentle question here and there, whether they had been traveling long, if they lived nearby, if they needed to use a phone, but each time, the woman offered careful, brief answers that revealed almost nothing. She appeared to be measuring every word, afraid that sharing the wrong detail might cause something terrible to unfold. The boy, on the other hand, glanced longingly at the soup again and whispered, "It smells really good." The woman's face softened with heartbreak, but she still said nothing. The old man's voice lowered to a compassionate tone as he said, "There's enough for both of you. I promise you're safe here." That word, safe, made the woman's eyes flicker, as though she wanted to believe it but couldn't. 4. Minutes stretched into a quiet hour, broken only by the sound of distant cars and the steady pattering of rain. The woman kept checking the street with increasing worry, her breath growing quicker each time she failed to see whoever she expected. The old man brought out an extra blanket and draped it over the boy, who whispered a small thank you while pulling it tightly around himself. The woman tried to refuse one for herself, but the old man gently placed it on a chair nearby in case she changed her mind. He noticed the boy's shoes soaked through and asked when they had last eaten. The woman answered too quickly, "Earlier," but her tone made it clear this wasn't true. Her protectiveness was fierce, like someone who had spent too long ensuring someone else's safety at the expense of her own. At one point, the old man glanced toward the street and said softly, "Whoever you're waiting for, Are you sure they're coming? The question hung heavily in the air. The woman pressed her lips together and whispered, they promised. The boy looked down, the word, promised, sounding like something he had heard fail before. 5. As the night grew darker, the rain turned into a cold, relentless sheet. The streetlights flickered, casting long trembling shadows across the pavement. The old man lit the porch lantern to create a warmer atmosphere, hoping it might ease the tension tightening the woman's posture. He poured a small serving of soup into a bowl and placed it near the boy, not pushing it toward him but leaving it accessible. The boy stared at it for several long seconds before the woman whispered, don't. Not unkindly, but with fear. The old man gently asked, is someone after you? The woman froze, her breath catching instantly. The boy looked at her, waiting for permission to speak, but she shook her head slightly. The old man did not push the question further. Instead, he sat down on the porch steps, letting silence fill the space and giving them room to trust him if they wished. After several minutes, the boy quietly confessed, we've been waiting for him since morning. His voice cracked. The old man looked at the woman, who closed her eyes tightly, fighting back despair. She whispered, he said he'd come get us. But he hasn't. 6. The story came out in fragments, hesitations, and trembles, not from the old man's insistence, but because the silence had finally become too heavy to carry alone. They had left a difficult situation, escaping a place where promises were made but seldom kept. The man they waited for was supposed to be a relative, someone who had offered them safety, but after traveling all day, they had received no calls, no messages, no sign he intended to show up. The woman had tried to stay hopeful for the boy's sake, insisting they wait where they were told. The old man listened without interruption, his heart aching for them both. He asked if they wanted him to call someone on their behalf, but the woman shook her head. All the numbers they had meant nothing now. The boy's stomach growled softly, and the old man finally said, I won't force you, but you don't need permission from anyone to accept kindness. The woman looked at him with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief, perhaps the first moment she started to consider that safety might still exist in places she didn't expect. 7. After another long stretch of silence, the woman slowly walked toward the edge of the porch, staring into the rain as though searching for a sign, any sign, that they were not abandoned. The boy shivered beneath the blanket, his teeth chattering. The old man, noticing this, moved the bowl of soup just a little closer to him. The boy looked to the woman again. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then gave a tiny nod. It wasn't permission, it was surrender to reality. The boy picked up the bowl with trembling hands and began to eat. Each spoonful seemed to refill his strength and warmth. The woman watched, relief softening her expression even as tears glimmered in her eyes. The old man sat quietly beside them, offering no judgment. When the boy finished, he whispered a shy, heartfelt, thank you. The woman's voice was soft when she finally said, I'm sorry for refusing earlier. It's just, we didn't know if we could trust anyone. 8. The old man gently replied, you don't owe me an apology. Sometimes fear teaches people to survive by saying no, even to kindness. His words landed with unexpected weight. The woman pulled the blanket around herself at last, finally accepting the warmth she had denied. The boy leaned against her, no longer trembling. The old man returned inside briefly and came back with sandwiches, fruit, and hot tea. This time, the woman did not refuse. She took the tea in both hands, letting the heat seep into her palms. For the first time since arriving, she let herself sit down. They ate slowly, quietly, with the kind of gratitude that comes from not knowing when the next warm meal will come. The rain softened outside, turning into a gentle drizzle. The street remained empty. No headlights appeared. No familiar voice called their names. The woman stared at the darkness for a long moment before whispering, I think, he's not coming. It wasn't defeat. It was acceptance of a truth she had run from all day. 9. The old man placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and said, then stay here tonight. I have a spare room. Tomorrow, we can figure out what comes next. The woman looked startled, as though such generosity was beyond the limits of what she believed possible. She hesitated, thinking of everything that could go wrong, but then she looked at the boy, whose eyes were already drooping with exhaustion. Trusting the old man wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity for survival. She nodded slowly, holding back tears. Together, they stepped inside the warm, modest home. The old man prepared the guest room with clean blankets and fresh pillows. The boy crawled into bed almost immediately. The woman stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of being offered a safe place to rest. She whispered, "Thank you, really." The old man smiled and said, "No one should have to wait in the rain for someone who isn't coming." 10. As the night settled into peaceful quiet, the woman sat beside the window, staring at the empty street that had once held her hopes. The old man brought her a final cup of tea and stood beside her, watching the faint glow of streetlights flicker off the wet pavement. "You're safe now," he said gently. The woman nodded, though her heart was still fragile from the day's uncertainty. She looked at the boy sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, and something inside her finally relaxed. Whatever awaited them tomorrow, new plans, difficult decisions, unknown paths, they would face it with renewed strength. The old man didn't ask for details or explanations, he simply offered what he had: warmth, safety, and a place where fear could rest. The woman whispered, "We were waiting for someone, but maybe we were meant to find someone else instead." The old man gave her a kind smile, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by warmth instead of rain, she realized that sometimes the people who save us are not the ones we expect, but the ones who simply decide to care.